Christianity has really added something into the mix that has really calmed us down and given us a far better view of ethics. Slavery was just the norm. No one ever questioned the idea that slavery should be abolished until the Christians came on the scene.
Inspiring Philosophy was recently on Timecast and Real Life podcast. He talks about how Christianity is the first religion to start to abolish slavery and to bring dignity and value to all humans. So let's get right into it.
I mean, like, you go back, you study human history, like before the rise of Christianity. I mean,
Yep.
we are evil. I mean, like, you would attack a town and you'd send the soldiers, you're not paying them. They're getting plunder. So when you attack a city and you actually win, the women, the children, they become your slaves. You can do what you want with them. Yes, the children too. You get to plunder. That's how you paid your soldiers. And that was human nature for the longest time until, I mean, like, as Tom Holland and others have talked about, you know, like, for example, if you read like the book like Christian Virtue Ethics or When Children Became People by O.M. Bakke, I mean, like, Christianity has really added something into the mix that has really calmed us down and given us a far better view of ethics. Human rights comes out of the Christian tradition. Abolition comes out. And this idea that if we're going to attack like Iraq, we're not going to send our soldiers into plunder. The Romans would have looked at us like we were stupid. Why would you not plunder Iraq? But yeah, we don't know how far we've come, and it's really unfortunate. We still got a long way to go. But I mean, like, you study the ancient world, it will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
Why don't you expand on that a little bit? Because I think that people are, especially young people today. I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. Young people today really look at the United States and Western society. They look at it as this total evil because it engaged in slavery, right? And it might be. And part of me thinks that it's just like I'm mad at Dad, but yeah, like the idea that, you know, Western society is unique, and this time of peace that we're living in is anomalous.
It is. Yeah.
And I think that it would do well to teach kids how reality is.
Well,
and reality is brutal, and life is full of pain. It's short. Death is imminent for everybody. And the fact that you have any peace at all in your entire life is actually the rare, you know, wonderful, fortunate thing that Western society in particular has provided for the world.
Well, if you go back to the ancient world, just look at how they treated children. I mean, infanticide was rampant. There's like a letter from one Egyptian husband to his wife said, by the way, if it's a girl, just kill it. Because that was normal in the ancient world, to just commit infanticide through exposure, especially deformed infants or weak children, like Seneca talks about that.
See, finally, that the Christians were the first ones to say, no, all humans have value. And the Christians would even go and save those girls and to bring them in and take care of them instead of other people like brothel companies or people who wanted more slaves or sex workers or whatever. Christians are the ones to bring value. We believe that all people are created in the image of God.
And so, like, yeah, we can look back at like surveys of like ancient families, and like only like 6 out of like 600. Owen Bakke talks about this in his book, When Children Became People. Only 6 out of 600 had more than one girl in the family. Well, why? Well, because infanticide was rampant, and boys were more prized because they could take care of the family. They would be, you know, they're first-class citizens, and girls were second-class citizens. And so they did that, and there they leave kids out on the countryside to have them exposed. Now, a lot of them survived, so they could be raised as slaves or in brothels. I mean, children to the ancient Greeks and Romans were used for sexual purposes. What happens? The Christians come on the scene, and John Martins talks about this in his chapter, Children in Late Ancient Christianity. Christians invented a whole new word to describe it because they refused to use the term child lover. They invented a new word called child corrupter. That's rhetorical to say, like, you can't be doing this.
Wow.
And so they really pushed ethics forward. Children need to be protected. They invented.
When did that idea, like, what was the spawn of that idea? Because here again, we grew up steeped in Christianity, and to us, the idea of you know, of abusing a child like that, we think of it as abuse. It makes a gut reaction in most people, and the people that don't have that gut reaction, they are looked at and they are treated as some of the most horrible monsters that I mean, you put a pedophile into prison, and word gets out, and they're going to end up dead.
Yep.
And that's in a prison with some of the worst, most violent people, our society, produces. So
that's because of Christianity. It's called taking care of the poor, loving each other, wanting other people to thrive, taking care of the less fortunate, taking care of the needy. That's absolutely awesome.
What was the genesis of that?
The Judeo-Christian tradition, especially Jesus saying, let the little ones come to me. Anyone who causes one of these little ones to sin, let a millstone be tied around their neck and cast into the sea. That kind of language. I mean, really, the Jews prior to the Christians were preaching to protect children. Then the Christians come on and they really expanded it, working on what Jesus and Paul taught. We know that the early Christians were including children, and they were baptizing them, including them in communion. They were full members of the community. The Romans and the Greek looked at them as like becoming adults, like they weren't full adults yet, or they weren't full people yet. Aristotle talks about them being like less rational, along with barbarians, women, and slaves. There was a hierarchy, and Christians come on the scene. They go, no, everyone here is the image of God, and they should have specific rights. That's something that also develops out of the Christian tradition. And they slowly start to change the culture. It took a while, for sure. I mean, you still had infanticide in the Middle Ages because even though the church was condemning it, it took a while to saturate the culture that Tom Holland talks about. But the reason why we think these kinds of things, that slavery is wrong, that human rights exist, that humanity has intrinsic value, and that children should be cared for, this comes out of the Christian tradition. In the ancient world, they were beat routinely. They were turned into sex slaves as children, boys and girls. It's, again, horrifying to read. And again, slavery was just the norm. No one ever questioned the idea that slavery should be abolished until the Christians came on the scene. The first one to say slavery should be abolished was Gregory of Nyssa, working on what he was learning in the scriptures and reading Paul in Genesis. And that slowly began to change.
When was that?
What was that?
When was that?
I believe it was in the 300s, as Gregory of Nyssa was around.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the wider culture did ignore him for a while, but you start to see throughout the Christian tradition them slowly moving to end slavery, that by the time you get to like St. Anselm, like it's sort of getting abolished from Europe in a lot of places. And so then the Europeans later on going, well, we're not allowed to enslave Christians. We know that's wrong. Let's go elsewhere to enslave people, and that's how you get the transatlantic slave trade. And then the funny thing is if you read about the transatlantic slave trade, a lot of the plantation owners were trying to keep their slaves away from missionaries, because if the missionaries come in, they're going to evangelize these slaves and turn them in to Christians, and then we'll have to free them. And so they were like, a lot of the Quakers were like being like oppressed in the Sugar Islands because they were trying to evangelize, and like, no, you can't do that because we need slaves. It's human nature has always been butting up against the Christian tradition, and Christian tradition has been trying to move.
Yeah, the Christian tradition is teaching us to go against our nature, to do things that not always benefit us, to go against our fleshly desires. Because sometimes we want to do things that are sinful. Sometimes we want to do things that are completely against God. Sometimes we want to hurt other people for our own gain. And that's not what Christianity teaches us. Christianity teaches us to take up our cross, to follow God, to be a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God.
Humanity slowly but surely in a much better direction. You can read about that in Catherine Gerbner's book, Christian Slavery. It's a very interesting history of the Sugar Island stuff.
Did the Jews take slaves in the early days?
They did, and then sometime in the first millennium, a lot of the popes started to outlaw Jews owning Christians as slaves, and then they started outlawing Muslims or Christians being sold to Muslims. And then you saw slow reforms happening. Like slowly they're like, okay, no more slavery here, but we'll allow it here still. So yeah, you saw, I think one of the popes in one of the 600s or 700s said no more Jews owning slaves and no more owning. And then one pope came along and he attacked the Venetian slave trade. He said no more selling slaves. By the way, he bought all the slaves and then freed them. And then, even Isabella of Spain did some horrible things, but she also outlawed enslaving Native Americans unless they were hostile or cannibals.
Wow.
So again, we saw slow reforms moving us that by the time the abolitionist movement comes along, it was deeped in this Christian tradition that there's something wrong here. And you can see it in the scriptures. Like go to like Ephesians 6, where Paul says, everyone quotes that. Slave masters, or, slaves obey your masters. But no one quotes right after that in Ephesians 6, where Paul says, and masters do likewise to your slaves. So he doesn't outright say slavery should be wrong, but he undercuts any sort of like reason for slavery to exist. If masters need to do exactly to their slaves as slaves doing, there's no institution of slavery at that point. Yeah. So the Christian values slowly start to undercut it. And this is why Tom Holland says Christianity was like a depth charge. It took a while for these explosions to go off and spread.
Yeah.
At the end of the 1800s, we had what was called the men who made America, the robber barons, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and they basically, I don't know if they particularly, but they would have like underpaid workers, and they would pay them in script sometimes.
I think that's absolutely amazing. Christianity completely flipped the script to give everyone value, because everyone is made in the image of God, and that's the beautiful thing. And you can see Christianity changed everything. So praise God for that. Been doing well against temptation. Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus, so we can do the good things He has planned for us long ago." So guys, I encourage you to go to Jesus today. Know that He loves you. He's longing to have a relationship with you. Put Him first. In the description below, you'll be able to click a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. It will be the best decision of your entire life. Also, guys, I have a Patreon, so if you want to support me on there, it would mean the world.